תכניס אותו. זה עכשיו מבקש לך שם חשמל. תודה. תודה. קוראים?
כן, תודה.
אז אולי לא צריך לעלות לזה.
את צריכה בשביל לשתף מסך. זה רק כשנראה בטלוויזיה, HDMI, אבל קליקר.
כאילו הגלים של הדברים.
לא יודעים כאילו דיברתי את זה, אז נסדר את זה ואז בסוף החבר. אז מתקשרים לכל אחד בזמן אחרי, עכשיו היא טוב לך.
אז מה נעשות?
תכיני את המצגת שלה. 50 כזה, 50.
מה השעות שלו?
רגע, אני ככה סבבה
אז לעשות שוין? כן,
קודם כל תיכנסי לשיחה, תעשי share screen.
שיחה של פעילות.
כן.
ויש שם נגיד, יש אישה או מחזמנים ראשי,
עוד לא שיתפת זה בסטינגס. רגע, סעיף 4. מה זה 4? אני ממש הלכת לסטינגס שלך. פה נמצא, סבבה. ודיספליי.
חדש?
כן, רגע, אני מעבירה לכם.
שנייה פה שלא נשמע אותנו. עכשיו יש share screen או משהו כזה.
או privacy maybe?
יכול להיות.
כאילו לתת רשות כזה.
בדיוק.
תעשה search.
הנה. מה יובל, מה קרה?
אלכס הגיע עד לפה?
לפעמים אני אעשה. בטיולים.
Alright, you don't have to do quit and reopen just to make it work.
עכשיו תקרא למצגת שלך ואני חבר אותה בטלוויזיה.
מה עם הנוט שלי?
יש לך נוט מה? בשביל שנראה את זה בטלוויזיה צריך...
למה בכלל, למה הסידור כזה?
לא, תכלס, למה שלא? אם זה אבל הקליקר שלך, יש לך קליקר,
It doesn't let me control what I'm sharing.
זה אצלה.
Yeah, but if I do that, then I lose my notes.
לא, עדיין את יכולה רגע, אפשר.
Yeah.
איפה הנאום שלך? צריך כזה present here? זה כן צריך לעשות. Can you go back to the display settings?
Sure.
Serial settings, displays.
So it's like a second
Again,
screen.
use S. And send.
So now this is like my second map.
Yes. And then you put here your
But where am I?
presentation notes, and now you are here. Okay. So
So this is me and the big screen is very screen. If I go to this.
if you go here, it's opens here, so you need to
Oh,
you can drag it to your display.
like my notes. Oh, thank God we're doing this.
No, just now just leave next to the slideshow, you have a little arrow. לא, צריכה לפתוח את זה שוב. תחפשי presenter view. No, presenter view, and then you can drag it. Yeah. כן, לפני זה תלכי לזום ותעשי share screen על זה.
לפני זה.
זהו,
וואו, איזה מזל שאתה פה. מי אתה בכלל? היי.
אני סטודנט.
וואלה. אני מישהי.
לא, הייתי, אבל התקבלתי. אני יובל.
יובל. שהציל אותנו. Okay, now I need to, so I don't have to join the Zoom or I still.
I don't know if you're in the Zoom now. Should you go back to the calendar and join again? אפשר לבדוק? אוקיי.
סאונד אבל
היא צריכה שיהיה לנו, כי הסאונד מחובר לזה. כן, אני פה. דסקטופ 2, I think. Okay. Yes. עברנו ליולי.
שאפשר לחול והכל בסדר, אז למה
תפתח לתומר הודעה קצת יותר מעניינת. וואי, ממש מעניין. רגע, מה זה? מה יש לך? יש כאילו זמן חופשי או?
אתה באמת כתבות ההרגשה מידע? בראשון או שאני
וגם תחצי לנו.
יש את הבנות? וואלה, לא היה תרגישה לא בכתב. מה עוד?
שמה ממש שאלה.
הנה, הוסיפו לנו זמן איתה אחרי ארוחת צהריים. הפרוססים. תנו לנו את הפרוססים. לא, יש לנו עבודות. היינו אמורים לעשות פה. הייתם פה גם בעצת שיחה בו. כן, ברור. עכשיו לא שקרה לב, אין לנו לא.
גם אתמול דבר שאלתי, על מוסר, ואני לא יודע, אני כבר נכנס על העניינים.
לא, כאילו קיבלתי, מה זה?
אתה נוסף עליי גמיל, אתה לא עושה, למה אתה לא עושה, זה נראה לך.
אז אני מוריד ישראלי, אני נשאר יפני או...
וואו, כן,
עדיין הוא
כן, עדיין לא הולך יחד. שמע, אני מתאם את הדברים, כן, נגיד, הם כאילו עושה קצת על הילד, הצוות שלהם, לא עובד, לא סתם, לא יודע, הוא בטח אחר, כאילו.
מה, אלה של שישה חודשים
לא, פילים בוויקסלי, עכשיו
כיפי.
כן, לא, זה ברור, גם אנחנו.
אני רואה את זה כאילו תמיד הייתי כאילו יותר בראש של פיתוח.
או של הבוח.
אני לא יודעת.
כן, נראה לי פחות כזה.
במיוחד לא.
תביא גם אותם, יובל. זה הכל.
לא, הם מחכים בשבועיים.
מה אתה עושה?
אבל תשמע, לא או שהיית גאון עכשיו, או שהיית גאון.
יש ממש כל מה שאתה אם אתה מכיר את האנשים, זה כן. אתה צריך לעבור לצד האפל ולכתחילה.
אתה רוצה לבדוק אם זה עובד?
הנה.
חברה שלי שהתראיינה לפרוד. שהתראיינה לפרוד, הרעיון הראשון, והיא אמרה כל הרעיון רק נתחיל לקרוא על דאטה, וכאילו מרצה, כאילו, המרצה שאפשר לדבר עליו, וירדתי בגלל
יודע מה עושים? כן. עושים סטיקר.
זה היה כזה לקנות מוצר.
אין מושג איך לעשות את
זה.
אני בוואטסאפ זה סיפורים שונים. יש לי וואטסאפ.
אני לא בסדר.
כולם ברוסיה.
היי. מוצר
כן, לא.
זה בא קצת, אבל...
תודה. וואו. מי שמשעמם אותך? טוב ש... היי גייז, אני מישל, UXית, או בוויקס. אז עברית זה סבבה לי, אבל אני אציג באנגלית, כן? בסדר לכולם? If you have any questions, you can switch to Hebrew, and I will try to answer them in Hebrew, but I also might not. Hi.
בדלר או וודלר?
תלוי. It's like my persona in Bradley. But in Hebrew, in English, it's fine. Okay. But originally it was probably German, and גם ככה זה היה Bradley. So, okay. So everybody, welcome. We don't have time to do like a whole seven around the table, but it's nice to see all your faces. Have you guys already had like presenters from other guilds? Are they doing like a...
Yeah, we had a PM today.
Yeah. Not all the guilds.
Not all the
Just
we don't know.
the important ones.
כותבים, אני רוצה לשמוע מה כותבים.
כן. כן משפיע על הדאטה, כאילו, כל מה שמשפיע על המוצר. טוב. So basically what I want to show you today is a bit about the UX Design Guild at Wix and how we tackle UX at Wix specifically, but I'm also going to do a lot of broad, just like what is UX, because everyone I think here maybe takes it for granted that they understand what it is, but I'll dive deeper into a few concepts that are often considered pretty basic, and it's an opportunity if you have any like dumb questions, like nothing's dumb. This is a safe space and you can ask things that might seem obvious and it's all good. Also, this will help you to understand maybe, you know, whether it's here or elsewhere, other UX designers that you wind up working with. It's good to always have a sense of like what their process looks like, what goes on behind the scenes, what motivates them, what they care about so that you can work best with them. And so first I'll just start with who I am. So I've been a designer, not only UX designer, but multidisciplinary designer for over 15 years now. I've been at Wix for exactly 4 years. I just celebrated my anniversary at Wix. I didn't really celebrate though, so I feel like Magali something, like a jacket or something. No, as if we don't get enough stuff, it's all good. So I'm originally from New York, as you can maybe hear, but I moved to Tel Aviv about 6 years ago, a little over 6 years ago, and I haven't looked back. I'm on the call. Within Wix, I work at a part of the company called Wix Stores, which is also sometimes called Wix Ecom, somewhat interchangeable. I'll explain it a little bit. And we are responsible for all of the e-commerce tools that Wix users need in order to build stores online and sell products and hopefully make bundles of cash. So just to give you a sense of the scope of what that includes, it includes business tools for designing these gorgeous storefront galleries and product pages. It includes tools to help them set up their product catalog and update their inventory on a daily or multiple times daily basis, to customize their purchase funnel and offer mobile and point of sale solutions. So if they have like brick and mortar locations, they can do that as well through their Wix dashboard. To upsell with things like discounts and engagement programs and marketing tools, to expand to sales channels like social media platforms and other marketplaces that they can integrate their store with, Amazon and Google, to manage orders and fulfillment and shipping and taxes. That's all under like the e-com platform side of online stores, of Wix stores, sorry. And so it's really this full holistic end-to-end suite of business solutions. So these days we're really focused on going up market. We want to level up, like Wix is often conceived of as a DIY solution, especially in the world of e-commerce. We have competitors like, you know, Shopify that are really geared towards like massive merchants that do business on a bigger scale than us, generally speaking. So we're looking at understanding like what are the tools that these sellers need that prevent them from building their stores on Wix instead of Shopify and trying to catch up, basically. And we're also very focused, as you may or may not have heard already, on Wix partners. So a lot of the tools are based on like not necessarily the merchant themselves, but agencies or designers who are building the store on behalf of the merchant. So back to the UX Guild, I'm basically going to cover these 3 different topics, and there's a lot to them. So if you have questions, maybe we'll go through it at the end. Like I'll go through everything, and then if you're not asking me, feel free. Okay, so what even is UX? So UX is short for user experience. The weirdest abbreviation ever. But in a nutshell, it refers to the emotions and the reactions that a user experiences when they're interacting with a product. So I'm going to unpack that. Today, most people think of UX only in regards to digital experiences, like interactive, you know, touch screens, and anything that's like a digital interface. But actually, this term was originally coined in the 90s. It was meant to describe the full experience of using any product, end to end. So that includes discovering the product, purchasing it, unpacking it, of course, using it, it's what we consider like the bulk of UX, but also sharing it with friends, talking about it, promoting it, and even discarding or deleting it is all part of the UX. So even when we think about designing digital products, we really try and think as holistically as that, like from start to finish. Okay, so hang on a second. What actually is a user? I know that sounds so basic, but to define it really clearly, it's any person who makes use of the product. And that's similar in our case to a customer, but it's not always the same person. And it's important to just think of different personas for a moment to really dissect that. So for example, the business owner, like I mentioned, is not necessarily the site designer and not necessarily the salesperson in a store who's utilizing a point of sale device and accessing the Wix platform through like a device in a store. So these are three different user personas. And those aren't necessarily the Wix customer who's, you know, the merchant, the business owner who's like paying for their Wix account. So these are all people. They all have unique contexts and levels of experience, different goals and ambitions. And sometimes they come into the product and they know exactly what they want to accomplish and they have a task at hand. And sometimes they come in a sort of exploration mode and they're just seeing what capabilities exist and they want to explore. So to design for all these users, we need to understand each of them really well. And anytime we design a flow, we need to understand, okay, what's the intent of the user? How specific or vague is it? And to just know them really well. And on that note, there's one small caveat that's really important for me to drive home, which is that you are not the user. In a sense, we're all users of a lot of products, but when we as UX designers at Wix are designing the Wix product, it's not really about what we think or what we experience when using it, because of course we're not the actual user with that high intent. I'm trying, you know, my livelihood depends on this business. I have to update this inventory now because otherwise it has actual fiscal consequences to me in real time. We don't feel it the way that they do. And, you know, we try to understand the user as best we can. We try to empathize with them. But the real users are the only ones who, you know, live with the product day to day. And in some sense, they often know the product even better than we do, which is, you know, humbling, but we're reminded of that all the time. And so this is a mantra that we often use in the UX Guild at Wix, just to kind of take the ego out of it and remind ourselves, like, this is just about understanding what users and the data behind the product are telling us about what's going on. Like, it's pretty objective. So we just remind ourselves we are not the user. Okay, the other side of UX is experience, which is also a pretty broad term, but I'm going to break it down. So it is three specific things. It's what users think. So it's like, do they understand what they're looking at and understand how the product works? It's what they feel. So this is the emotional state they're in. Are they feeling impatient or surprised about something, or happy or satisfied, or maybe relaxed or pressured? You know, these are all emotions that they come into the product with, or that we could steer to maybe a different emotion as they leave the product. And then finally, what they do. So that includes where they look on the screen and what they touch. And then, of course, the bottom line is what actions they take.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you somehow, אני אגיד בעברית, לכמת the emotions, like, do you know, for example, quantify. Thank you. For example, like building a website can be frustrating. I cried once trying to build a website. So how can you try to understand how to use it?
Okay, your question might get answered in a later part of the presentation, because I go over, like, in the methodology, there's a lot of research that we do, and it's like all different types, so that we can try and understand them. So it might be clear, but if it's not, let's do it again at the end. Okay, I go into it a little more. So what's my role as a UX designer? So on a really macro level, we're basically advocating for the user. I need to understand them and I need to sort of be their voice in the room, right? We're sitting here like in this beautiful building of product designers and developers and designers with all these great ideas. But I'm in the room and I really think of this, I'm like representing all these people out there who don't have the privilege of being in here and having their voices heard. So I need to speak for them, I need to advocate for them to make sure that they get the optimal product experience in the end. Of course, while taking into account all kinds of business goals for Wix, et cetera, et cetera. So at Wix, the UX designer is actually responsible for both the functional and the visual aspects of the design, which is not a given. At a lot of companies, this is divided up into 2 different roles. Because they are 2 different aspects of the product. And so here you can see the functional is what's basically usually called the UX design position, and the visual is usually handled by a UI designer. When they're combined, they're often called product design, just as like an umbrella term. But at Wix, they're always combined. So like we don't accept any UX designers who don't have either traditional graphic design experience or UI design experience specifically. It's something that we require, that all our UX designers are capable of doing both. So it's not just like wireframing and user journey mapping. It really is also like the fine touches and finesse of the design. Even though we have a team that handles the design system, which I'll explain as well, it's important that everyone can completely step into roles. And this basically stems from the idea that they can't live without each other, right? They're inseparable. As you can see here, right? Like if you hadn't thought out the way that a product was going to be used, you might wind up designing something that's cute, but sucks to use. And so we try and design things that are beautiful, but also consider the way that they will be used in the end. This is a classic example that we love to talk about in the Guild as well, which is the iconic Heinz ketchup bottle. We all recognize it, of course, like it's classic, it's sort of elegant, it has this great vintage classic appeal. But there's this one really critical issue with it. Does anybody want to try and just finish the line there? What's the issue with this bottle? Jumping ahead to a solution, yes. What's wrong with it?
It's made out of gum.
Also a downside, potentially, but more
Get the ketchup out.
sustainable. Getting ketchup out. That's the function of the bottle. Why do you have ketchup in a bottle? It's so that it like gets from God knows factory, right, where it's made, to your burger that you want to put the condiment on. And to use it, you need to get it out of the bottle onto your burger. And anybody who has experience using this bottle, I don't know how many of you have been to like diners in the States, but it's like what they serve there for some reason, and it's torturous. It's always a struggle to get it out. It gets messy. You can't control, you know, the portion. You can't control exactly where it lands and when and how much comes out. So these are all really basic product requirements to get the condiment onto your food, and they're all really unpleasant. And I would say not met by this product. And that's why this is the bottle that's probably in, you know, your refrigerators at home or that you encounter most often. Because a few years back, you know, Heinz came out with this one. They designed it for functionality. Again, to just get the ketchup from the bottle and onto your food. And the designers of this bottle most likely went through a process that's very similar to what we do at Wix when we design a product, which I'll explain. Basically, that starts with understanding what are the pain points of a user, and to understand the pain points, you need to watch them use it, observe what happens when they try and use it, and then fix those. So, you know, this newer bottle might not have that same classic appeal, but you can see that it kind of pays homage to the original glass bottle that's more iconic. I think they found a way to sort of balance, like it's not the ugliest plastic bottle that it could be. I think they tried to kind of balance the functional and visual aspects, but overall the product experience is much, much better. So this basically demonstrates these 3 fundamental aspects of great product design. So if the product is useful, meaning the user benefits from using it, the product is usable, so that's the ketchup bottle, they can actually extract the benefit, hopefully with relative ease. And even though the product is desirable, the user wants to use it, which is sometimes an aspect of just the look and feel of the product itself. So if you have all 3, you have great UX. So back to reality, how do UX and UI come together to create great products at Wix? This is a quick example that at this point is pretty old, but it's so good at just explaining this tiny change with a huge impact. So this is an old version of the My Sites page. This is where a user who has multiple sites on Wix would be able to see all of them in one place, create new ones, manage, delete, and get an overview of all the sites that they have on the platform. The team that manages this area of the product found that users who have many sites find this page very hard to manage. They find it overwhelming. Which is strange because there is this ability to organize them into folders, right? You can see a couple here, just that I made up at the top. You can organize your sites into folders, so it shouldn't feel that overwhelming. Folders are meant to create order, hierarchy, grouping, category maybe, or whatever else they need. So what was the problem? So the team did some digging, and they noticed that the click rate on this button to create a new folder was alarmingly low. Like it just wasn't being used, certainly not as much as they expected it to. So they decided to test this new solution, just enlarging it. Sorry?
Is this because the UX understood and then the analyst did this, or so are you saying did this check?
I don't know who flagged the problem initially. There are a lot of different places that things like that can get raised from. Like there are product support group teams that often bubble up issues that we're not necessarily tracking as a product and UX team, but that they just all of a sudden they see tickets like climbing and they'll let us know, hey, like this is a trending issue. Sometimes it'll be because we are researching a certain topic and we stumble upon an issue in support tickets that, you know, surprises us or we didn't anticipate. If it's related to a recently released issue, then we are tracking it and watching and seeing our users understanding how to use the product. Are they, you know, what's the usage rate? So there's 1.5 million ways that, you know, this could have been raised. In this case, I'm not sure who raised it, like which direction it came from. But so the rest of the story goes that they basically decided to experiment with a new design and then test it to see what the impact is. So the changes they made, this is like an exaggerated scale, it's really like this, but they swapped the order of the two buttons. So now you have create new site on the right, which is like our standard location for creating new items of any kind in the business manager. They also created hierarchy between the two. So now the create new site has a primary skin, which helps just differentiate it. Between here, I'll go back to the old one so you can see the comparison. So they both had like a secondary skin. So there wasn't enough hierarchy. And the big difference is also that they added text. The button now says create new folder instead of this little icon, which you can see it from here, but it's like a little folder with a plus, which just leaves enough room for like not knowing what it is and then just clicking it. And then the team ran an A/B test. So they rolled out the new design to some users. They kept the old design for other users. They tracked those two groups, what A/B testing is. So can anyone guess how this changed users' behavior?
So
How you define the behavior? Like, is it better if they click it more?
So I would define it as clicks or engagement with these two buttons. Ultimately, though, it's interesting. It's like a good question because ultimately this came from the fact that people were feeling, they found that users were feeling overwhelmed. So there's another level to this of comprehension. Like, do we see, let's say, support tickets going down? That could be another way to confirm that like a solution was reached. The main tangible impact it had was that clicks on the create new folder button went up by 194%. So that means that now people are finding their way to this tool that was allowing them to create order in the page. And I don't have the data on what happened to the support tickets, but I'd imagine that now people are using a feature that existed in order to achieve what they wanted, hopefully. So again, it has icon and text. It makes like, it removes room for confusion or interpretation. Even though the older design was like more compact, as a designer, we're always like, we're drawn to things that are more minimalistic and nice and neat and aesthetic. And, you know, from that hat, I would go with the top one, but comprehension wise, it just leaves too much ambiguity. So the second one with the text and icon combination is much, much clearer. And so, and the hierarchy of information, of course, between the two buttons is much clearer. So this small design change had a really huge impact on users' understanding of the feature and therefore their usage of it and their behavior. So I just want to go back. Oh, sorry.
I had a question.
Yeah.
You can go back. You changed the position of the buttons. So like the create new site button was on the left side of this, I want to say container.
Mhm.
And create new site is now on the right side.
Yeah,
Do you have like the way to understand if I'm like with a muscle memory clicked on a button with a white background, or am I like
yeah.
doing it on purpose?
Yeah,
actually.
So that's an interesting question. I think like,
Because I just look at it and I feel like something wrong. Why did you change the positions? It's so.
it's a big change.
Yeah.
So this A/B test, classically, like the recommendation for A/B testing is to do really incremental changes. Yeah, like really, so this was like, I would say 3 to 4 changes in one.
Yeah.
So yeah, like we wouldn't be able to analyze, is it the placement of the buttons, or was it the color of the
Yeah.
buttons, or was it the icon in the text, or was it the, yeah, it's a great point. Like we can't really break down, is it just because we swapped the two and people were used to clicking a big button over here, you know, like.
This one I'm talking, yeah.
Yeah, and so, yeah, on that point, it's not a perfect A/B test. I think like the ideal, right, is to, if you really want to understand like what's gonna move the needle, and you have time and resources to have a perfect A/B test. So yeah, you'd want to do it like just bit at a time, and then maybe move back on this one and forward on this change, and then get like the perfect combination of things. But sometimes it's also like we take a few steps forward on a hunch, and then maybe tweak it if we have to later. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll zoom out again for a second, just because, you know, again, like we work with product teams and developers, and from a technical and product point of view, there was no problem on this page. Like the feature that solves the user's problems is there. They're not blocked from achieving what they need, which is organization on this page. So the feature existed. It wasn't a feature, like a lack of a feature. But the other factor that comes into play is users. And the feature was not noticed by users, and therefore it wasn't used. So this goes back to the friendship model, because I say this all the time, like no matter which part of Wix we're working in or which role we're in, we're all working on products and tools that need to be used by someone who isn't us. And if the product doesn't work for them, or if they don't know how to use it, or if they can't find it, or if it's not clear to them, then the product doesn't work. Okay, so luckily there are a few key ingredients, a checklist, if you will, that every great interface should include to create a good, understandable, clear UX. And there may or may not be a quiz on this later. So clear navigation, clear identification, and clear call to action. What are each of these? So clear navigation is how did I get here? And how do I get out? Clear identification is what is this page? What is this page or screen or product that I'm currently in? And a clear call to action is what do I do next? What am I meant to do here? What action do I take? So here's another example from the Wix Business Manager. This is in the site settings area. And this is like a template, right? Every page of the Business Manager has this same pattern. So it's also, the pattern is also part of the consistency that trains users to look for these things in the same places, muscle memory, if you will. So we have breadcrumbs at the top of the page. That's my navigation. So that tells me how I got here and also how I can get out or back. And then thanks to this gigantic page title and subtitle, I know that this is the roles and permissions page. So there's no confusion. No matter how I got here, if I got here from some link from the editor or wherever, I know what I'm currently in. And then the bold blue action button up here, which is always in its permanent location on the top right, gives me a clear call to action. So I know what I'm supposed to do here, or at least the main action that I'm here to do. So in UX, we're basically designing in order to help users around the product. Okay? We're like the host. We're there to orient them, to show them what they might be looking for, to show them what else is around, if they need this later, offer them a cold glass of water, whatever it is they need to make them feel that they can find what they need in the product. Hopefully in a less cheesy way than this. So just to recap, it's the job of the UX designers to create the optimal experience of our products. And I say optimal and not perfect, because of course, we're not the only ones running the show here. We work on a team with various considerations. You know, we have constraints like dev costs and technical limitations or business priorities changing, or our marketing agendas or deadlines or all kinds of things that we also, of course, have to take into account. So it's not an easy job. And I will now show you who the heroes and heroines are behind this not so easy job in the UX Guild, the heroes behind the Figma files. So we're actually a relatively gigantic group here within Wix. Today, as it currently stands, the Guild is home to about 190 designers in total, about 170 of whom work inside the different Wix product teams. And then there are about 10 that are centralized as part of Wix components, which I'll explain what each of these are, and another 10 that are part of the UX Hive. So the product team, we have over 40 companies at Wix, and each of these different companies have at least one UX designer embedded in the product teams. Most of them have at least 4 dedicated UX designers. So just to give you like an overview of what UX designers work on, this is just within the editor team. There are 3 different editors for different user types, different personas, different product features. I'll skip ahead a little bit. In the business manager, just to look at stores for a moment, we've got all the business solutions for running a store. So if I'm just looking at stores alone, these are just like the main pages of enormous areas, each of which have several flows and features. We have a lot of complex functionality and logic behind them. So behind each one of these areas is a UX designer that kind of owns that domain. Over in the Wix components team, we have dedicated UX designers who create and maintain the Wix design system. So that's basically the single coherent design guidelines that we use across all Wix products. We recently merged. There have been several like generations of different design systems, and there now currently is one that's used in the business manager and editor. So they're shared at least between those two. There are still a couple other peripheral design systems that I won't get into. There's also the UX Hive, which is a specialized group within the Guild that supports various teams for specific needs, whether it's something temporary, like often they dispatch UX designers into the product teams when they have something that they need to work on, let's say if they're on a tight deadline or they suddenly need like more manpower in one part of the company or another, whatever reason. And it also includes, the team also includes the illustrators that are in charge of creating our illustration language here. And animators who then take these illustrations to life. And these are just assets that show up in the product. So again, if UX is all about, you know, what catches your attention, what actions you take, how you feel as you're using the product, this all like ladders up to that same goal. Last but not least, it also includes our UX prototypers. So these are the ones who develop fully functional previews of some of the important user flows before we go into production. So that often helps us, you know, validate our designs before we spend too many resources on them. And now I will talk about the UX methodology. So you guys are doing great. This is the home stretch. Congrats. Okay, so because of all the different teams that I just showed you and all the different products and just the sheer number of how many designers we have, having this really clear and clearly defined methodology is critical to just making sure that we're all in step and in sync and organized so that we can work on all these different products. So this is the overview of the workflow. It looks like this. There's the steps that I'll break down one by one to make sure that the process is airtight. It doesn't go like this, where it's product manager and then UX designer and then maybe developer and then analyst. It's not meant to be, you know, a hot potato that you pass on from one part of the team to the next. It's meant to be a path that we all walk together. So every person on the team is involved from day one, from the moment we decide or identify what is an important feature to work on, right? Because that doesn't necessarily come alone from a product manager. That can come from all kinds of things like we've already started to talk about. And so of course, each person in the team has their own specialty area and expertise that they bring, but everybody needs to be involved from day one. So we all are looped in, we all have a voice. And of course, you know, day to day, we practice even compressed versions of this life cycle and more agile workflow and with things like the milestone release method. I don't know if they've talked to you guys about that yet. But even then, or especially then, it always includes these stages. So I'll explain what they are.
What is the difference between UX and UX writer? You might say that, and I missed it, but
I didn't at all. I actually didn't talk about UX writing at all.
oh, because in the previous yeah, you say that UX plus UX writer.
So the UX is shorthand usually for the UX designer. So they're the ones who are really the owners of the experience and the design holistically. And the UX writer provides the content.
Mm.
So like the text.
But they're both under the UX skill.
They're not both under the UX guild. And it's not the only example of weird things where it's like, why are you this and not that? Like when I first started at Wix, I had like a total identity crisis that there was a design guild and I wasn't in it. Like I'm in this one called the UX guild, but I'm a designer, you know, like it was a funny thing. And UX writers as well, like UX writers are in the writers guild, technically, organizationally, right? Like Wix point of view, that's a writer. But obviously they have like one foot in each world, right? It just means that, you know, when it comes to like guild days and trainings and resources that are shared, the things that are most relevant to the same group of people have to do with writing.
Mhm.
But of course, the UX writers, like, especially when you have a really good team dynamic, like I've worked with the UX writer I've worked with now for almost the entirety of my time at Wix, maybe 3 years or so or before. I absolutely rely on her to think through like what's an intuitive user flow and to research with me, like what are the terms that users are looking at and what's the moment that they think to enter this flow and is it from here, is it from here? Like we think about it together so that then when she writes the content for it, it's not like, hey, I made this design, I need 3 lines of text to fill it out, right? Like they're part of the UX with me completely. But it is 2 different roles and 2 different guilds even.
Yeah.
Great question. So, okay, so at the beginning of every product that we create, we start with product analysis research. So a lot of things, and this is probably the part of the process that most involves you guys, as well as the other end of the loop, which is the loop too, but we'll get there. So a lot of the product analysis comes from user feedback or user input or user requests. So we look at things like support tickets, we watch screen recordings, we conduct user interviews, we do usability testing, and we just observe and we gather information and watch what's happening so that we can figure out what are the current pain points with the product, either with an existing feature or a feature that clearly users are either asking for or we can see that they wish that they had and they don't. Because those are basically our biggest opportunities to improve the product. We also research and analyze what our competitors are doing in similar products, right? So I mentioned like keeping up with Shopify. So that's of course sort of the ultimate competitor when it comes to Wix stores, the part of the product that I'm in. But we want to see what we can learn from it, what users or potential future users are used to, like what style of workflow they're used to using, what terminology they're used to seeing. In some products, we might decide that it's best to align with conventions that we see across the industry because it makes conversion smoother from one platform to another. In other cases, we might decide, okay, like that's how they do it, we're going to do it better and improve on something with some more original, fresh thinking. But we do all of this in order to clarify the goals of the product and the scope of the product and understand why we're going to do something, yes, differently or not differently than what we see. And we also collect data on users' behavior. This is one of the first steps that we take. So this helps us define our KPIs, optimize the KPIs, ultimately improves decision-making because we can gain a lot of insight about where to invest our energy by understanding the current product. So I'll give just one example from stores. This is a part of the product that I work on really closely, which is the categories in stores. So you create products that you sell in your store, you can group them into categories. They're useful for displaying them on the storefront, but also just for managing your business. You have them in these groups that you can manage. Product-wise, the business manager or the dashboard is the focal point for all the catalog flows because that's where categories live.
Mhm.
But as we're rolling out all these product updates, there are a few recurring usability issues around comprehension, like around the behavior of categories on the storefront. And users struggle with some basic aspects of the product, even though we do provide a lot of like explainer content, UX content that's meant to help them in the dashboard. And something that we recently discovered when we were researching something really basic, we stumbled upon this very surprising insight that a huge portion of categories, literally half of the categories created in Wix stores, are created via the entry point in the editor. Even though, like I mentioned, categories are managed and they live in the business manager. So what happens from these entry points here is like, it pops up the business manager in a modal on the editor, but the initial entry point into that flow was from the editor, meaning that that's the moment the user thought, oh, I guess I need a new category for this, because let's say on this instance, I'm creating a slider. I really want this slider on my homepage. I wanted to show my, new collection of soaps, let's say. And you go into the panel to decide what products it's going to show, and you realize actually you didn't really ever create a category called soaps. I guess you should do that now, right? So they come in through this like backdoor to categories. And once we understood that, which kind of like blew our minds, it made us understand that any flows that we design or edit or affect in any way regarding categories has to be done with this special eye on these entry points, if not, to put them in top priority. So even to take that a step further, like if I were going to do something in these flows, I could even investigate which user types are engaging more with this entry point versus the one in the business. Like I could dissect that further and understand, okay, these are like mostly partners, or these are mostly premiums, or this pre-published users who are, like I can understand that more. And then maybe I could tailor some messaging near the entry point that's best directed to those use cases, potentially. We haven't done that yet, but these are ways that understanding that data can affect product and UX decisions. Okay. In the second phase, don't worry, that was the longest one, we define the product spec. So first we do that by mapping all the possible user journeys. So we start from the most common ideal flows, which we call the happy flows, all the way to the sort of most unusual combinations. We call those edge cases. And once we have all the user journeys mapped out, we create rough sketches of the new product just to start validating our ideas. So we might create low fidelity wireframes just so that we can consider a really, really wide range of possible solutions before we start honing in on which one is the best. And once we have a clear concept in mind, we go into functional design. So this is high fidelity wireframes, sometimes even prototyping. At this stage, it's less about the visuals because we're just finalizing the way that the users move through the product, the way they interact with it. But even here, for example, speaking of UX content, this is always with the real content because that is so deeply intertwined with the user flow and the way that we're building these journeys. So we always use real content, even at that stage. So like I mentioned, we also often use an interactive prototype at this stage because it's still early enough to tweak the way that the product behaves if we have to see something in motion, especially with things that involve like inline editing or drag and dropping or things that will affect what you see on the screen. It's really helpful to like feel it and either for us to test it out or even just show it to some users or even just coworkers who aren't close to the product just to get like that gut reaction because it can save a lot of dev effort and energy in the future. And then we move into visual design. So this is where we create pixel perfect designs for every screen in every flow. And this is where like the UX and the UI sides of the role come together. So we have real styles from the design system. We needed them to pass design reviews with the design system team. We make sure that everything is on brand, that we're adhering to like the latest conventions and other parts of the product as well. And once we're done with that, it's time to wrap up the final UX design for dev handoff. And then of course, we're working hand in hand with a clear and organized Figma file, clearly annotated for developers. And there's a lot of on-the-go communication and follow-up just to make sure nothing gets lost in translation. And then when everything is built and working perfectly and passes QA, we release it into the wild. And then, we're not done yet, we have the post-launch, so this is where we monitor really closely and we watch what happens. And we dig into a ton of data because, you know, depending on what the goal was of this product or feature or edit that we made to the product, we need to see, did we fix what we were trying to fix? Or is this new feature not landing right? Is it hard for users to understand? Are we seeing support tickets go up or go down? What kind of feedback are users expressing to us? So we analyze all of that and then we make adjustments or iterations if we need to. We often sit with users and we watch them use it. We talk with them. Sometimes it's users that we spoke with at the beginning of the stage, at the beginning of the process, and we bring them back in and show them prototypes or new designs of like beta users, just to understand how this feels to them. And we watch these real-time recordings in a program called Full Story. So this is where we can identify friction points. This is where we see there's this thing called rage clicks that you can like monitor and watch what parts of the product you get rage clicks on. Just like, you know, like FedEx, like tons of clicking, or scrolling behavior, other useful feedback. Like I've had moments where I've rolled out designs I've worked on and did not realize that the itty bitty screen that this user is on a PC where they have their resolution magnified, you know, P2, and like it's in Russian, and all of a sudden it breaks in a million different places, and we wind up with this internal scroll inside a modal. And I never thought we'd reach that instance, but it led me to understand why people were missing the link to the knowledge base, like the Wix support article at the bottom of the modal, because they weren't seeing it because of all these different cases. So only by watching how it winds up on other people's screens, you can understand things like that.
And how do you see, like, how is it possible that you can see users' screen? Like when users come and you actually see them, or do you?
So if they come here, we like record their screen while they're using it.
All right.
We sit there and we're like available for questions. It depends if it's a user interview or usability testing, where you really don't want to like kind of divulge too much or like lead them down the right path or ask like leading questions. You want like a pure experience. If it's a user interview, you might ask them like, how did that feel for you, or things like that. Or what did you expect was going to happen here? Where would you look for this feature? But with Full Story, we're watching recordings. So we can look up by, let's say, the text on a button. We can watch all recordings that include this button on the screen. And then anytime a user has this button appear on their screen, we can watch like, you know, the hour that led up to that, the hour that followed that. We can see like what they clicked on next. We can watch them go back and forth and we can say, okay, user looked really confused. You don't get the audio, right? Like when I watch these, I wish I could hear them talking to themselves, like, how do I do that? You know, but we can watch their screen movement.
Okay.
And then we're back in the loop again, right? It goes back to the beginning. So if we see we need to make updates, we understand what updates they are and how might we address them. And then we continue to improve our products all the time. So now we'll do the pop quiz. We have time? Yes? No? I don't think
Actually,
so.
no.
Actually, no?
No, we're on
Swan.
lunch.
Oh.
5 minutes.
Oh my God. Okay. Forget that. Food. I will skip the pop quiz. That's the gist of the principle of UX design, and also a bit about, you know, UX Guild and your teammates and people that, you know, maybe at some point down the line you'll work with either here or elsewhere, so that you can understand it all.
I just have a technological question. You said that user experience is not only digital,
Right.
but wouldn't the person that did the ketchup bottle, wouldn't that be an industrial designer?
So product design, right, is like, can be physical or digital. And then there are all kinds of terms for every industry to like define it further. Yeah, like an industrial designer or a product designer. You can also call them a product designer.
Never heard something.
Would
physically
design a
usable
physical
than that.
product. Not anymore, usually, but like now that we conceive of UX as this really broad term, like often, like, you know, you'll hear people talk about UX, like UX on like this, you know, process of buying a ticket for a concert was like really shit, just because like, is that product design? Is that digital product design? Like, it's all related.
I have a question. Do you also design like the templates and the UX of the users of the users?
So here's another amazing example of like guilds within the guilds that you're like, what guild is that even? So the templates are designed by a template design team, which sits in the design guild.
Okay.
They are also totally product designers because they're designing like the navigation of a pretend website. And so they have one leg in the design guild and one leg in the UX guild, sort of. There's even another subsection of designers that sit in the product teams. They don't sit like off in the studio in the pretty part of the building with the lights. That's where all the designers in the design guild sit. There are designers that sit in the product teams that design for the user of user. And they're called the content on stage design team.
Okay.
So for example, I work on store categories, to take that use case. Like I'm designing the flow for users building categories of their products.
Mhm.
But then how that expresses itself on their site is handled by a different designer. And like we, you know, work hand in hand all along the whole process, but we're different. We have different things, parts of the process that we own.
Yep.
Yeah. Food?
Yeah,
Good.
thank you.
Thank
Thank you very much, Michelle.
Alex, Tipi Vitali.
Adiós.